Screen Blur.
Hello and welcome to Screen Slurps, the movie review podcast where we discuss the good, the bad, and the savage in the world of cinema. I'm Adam Meisner.
And I'm Laura Herlocker.
And this week we are here with one of the greatest film critics I have had the grace of, sharing my time with, my good friend, aficionado of the movie universe, Matt Fagerholm. Matt, please enlighten me with your grace. What have you been up to?
I am so flattered. I hope I can live up to a shred of what you've built up for me. Just a reputation. This is a total honor to be invited. This is and it's a fantastic setup you guys got. I wish the viewers at home could see it. This whole makeshift studio you have here is just fantastic.
I was gonna say, don't put yourself under any shadow of disillusion here, because you write for Roger Ebert, and so many people, I've seen it myself with my own two eyes, that many people are walking up to you and just wondering as they kneel before you, Matt, how have you done it? How have you become what you are today, writing for Roger Ebert? Just how has it happened? And it blows my mind too, what you're doing right now as a film critic, and we're here today podcasting about movies, but you yourself, you do it on the daily. You're writing about movies, and I'd like to know a little bit about what it is that got you doing what you're doing today. What was the beginning?
Absolutely.
When did you plant the seed?
No,
and,
I was just talking with some I was talking with some high school journalists over the summer. There was an event in Springfield, and they asked me to just kind of share what it was that led me to the Roger Ebert site, how my career evolved. And I basically just found it within me to say, and I've said this to other students too, that, it was what I was doing on the side. It was what I always thought was my hobby ended up becoming my day job, but in a way that was not at first about making money. It was so much about, finding a way to make the passion happen while also having the, money coming in a different way. It was, I was always writing. I worked for, I was at a college, my college paper, Columbia College, had no film coverage. This is like a film school. It's an art school. They had no weekly film reviews. And so I just, I was just writing reviews for fun. That was how I processed film. I couldn't watch a movie and not want to immediately just write my thoughts down and kind of analyze it. And so I just had files of like my reviews over the years that I might share with a friend every now and then, but it was really just for me. It was just how I process things. And eventually a friend of mine and my mom, I have to give her credit as well, said, maybe you should submit this to the paper. Maybe you should, and they hired me without me taking a single journalism class. I was a film student. I wasn't a journalism student. So I took journalism classes while I was working for the paper, which I don't even think they allow very much, but it was amazing. It was the best education. The best education, and you can ask any production assistant on a film set, is just diving right in and actually experiencing it viscerally in front of you. And that, being a member of the college press gives you the contacts when because you have access to the same junkets that all the professional critics do. So I got to meet, Michael Phillips. I got to meet Roger Ebert, all these people while I was still in college. And it provided me with kind of the roadmap, because Columbia is wonderful in terms of the connections, the networking. They don't really do much in terms of job placement, at least for film students. They don't give you a really good career path.
Isn't that
ironic? And so for me, it was the internships. It was interning for Brian Tallarico at HollywoodChicago.com, which now I'm working for him again at Ebert. Coincidentally, as far as I understand it, it was, I was being assigned many things at Hollywood Chicago, and I have to give Brian credit. He would assign me many different types of films to review, so it stretched me as a critic. And it didn't pay very much, but I got my byline out there. It was a great platform, but there were all these smaller films. It was the independent films I was much more interested in. And my sister, Emily, said, there's this thing called WordPress. You can have your own WordPress blog. You can, buy your own URL and set up a site where you can cover what you want. And you can go on Facebook or back then it was Facebook. Now it's more like Instagram, different social media things. You don't even have to go to a publicist on some like the micro budget films. You can go right to the filmmaker and say, hey, I'm interested in your movie and I'll cover it. And so I started this site, Indie Outlook. It's been around for 10 years. I don't know how much further it's going to go, quite frankly, but it was a really good 10 years, in terms of what that platform was, championing work that was passionate to me. And that site I haven't made a single dime off of. I haven't put in the blood, sweat, and tears of actually getting sponsors because I've been so focused on, my Ebert work. But I wouldn't have gotten into the Ebert site without Indie Outlook. It was the first filmmaker I talked to, Nathan Adloff, wonderful guy. He was working for the Eberts as a tech consultant, and he, Chaz. It was a year after Roger passed, and his wife Chaz, who's the publisher, who's an incredible human being as well as boss. She was looking for people to recruit for the site, and Nathan just suggested my name, and I had an interview with her, and it was just that sort of serendipity. And it wasn't until she started reading some of the work I did on that site, on my blog, where she said, we should be getting him in doing reviews. We should be getting him in doing, some of the regular coverage. And so really, I haven't made a dime off of that site, but that's been everything. And it was just a place
exactly
to use as a platform. And I've had so many filmmakers thank me for the coverage I did on there. And that's the best thing I can say. It's whatever is your hobby will likely be what unlocks the door for you ultimately and where you want to go.
Yeah. I actually had the chance to meet Chaz, and she is really great.
She is. She really puts her money where her mouth is in terms of what she believes in, the films, the filmmakers she wants to champion. She's also getting into producing now, which is interesting, as you have one leg in journalism and that, and how you navigate that. But, she really believes in Roger's, kind of stated, it really became like kind of the line of his life. He said that cinema is a machine that generates empathy. And I really feel that the film we're going to talk about today fits right into that category.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think you really just painted the picture, the road to where we're leading with the film we're talking about this week, which is 13 Conversations About One Thing. And that one thing that they're talking about is happiness. Which,
is it, though?
Well, that's a good question. I'm throwing it out there as it may be happiness, but is it happiness?
No, that's one of the things I wanted to talk about, because reading up reviews and things, generally it is happiness that they say is like the one thing. But I didn't get that while I was watching the movie. I felt like it was conversations about a lot of things. There's regret and guilt and happiness and love. Like there's so much. And so,
yes.
I don't know. For me, I just found it interesting that everyone was like, no, it's happiness. And I was like, I don't think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I think that's wonderful. That's the beauty of film, is there's more than one way to interpret things. And I like how she leaves it deliberately vague in that title. And I should say Jill Sprecher. I'm trying to see if it's Sprecher.
It's a great
Sprecher,
last name if it's
Roger
like Sprecher.
said Sprecher.
You just start thinking about root beer. You're like,
the Sprecher
bring me the Sprecher.
Yes, Jill Sprecher. I just want to I just want to illuminate her for a second, because she's someone who I just wish she would make more films, because the two films I've seen of hers, I haven't seen her third. She made 3 films with her sister Karen, who was the co-writer, Karen Sprecher. The 2 films she made, starting with Clock Watchers. I don't know if either of you have seen this film. This is from 1970 or 1997. It was her first film. It's a workplace comedy with Toni Collette, Parker Posey, Lisa Kudrow, and Alana Ubach, and it's a fabulous film about just kind of the hell of being a temp worker, of being in a place where the boss in the hierarchy just assumes that you're too lazy, so you have to be put in these ridiculous, rigid strictures of the work environment. And it's a fantastic film. It's I think it predates Office Space, and I think Office Space in a way owes a lot to this film. But there's a lot of satire in there, and 13 Conversations obviously is much more dramatic, but you can see elements of that humor certainly with Alan Arkin in his workplace, and the guy who's way too cheerful that he just can't stand. And I mean, she gets workplace environments so beautifully and perceptively, but there's also a much more depth to the film than you would typically see. So Clock Watchers and 13 Conversations, I can't recommend those films highly enough. They're just fantastic.
Well, even So I was reading the Roger Ebert review, obviously, and he was kind of saying the same thing. Like, I think one of the quotes that I pulled out was that, like, he has never been more excited to watch the next film of someone. And unfortunately, like you said, it took her a very long time. Wasn't it like 10 years until she made her third movie? So we had to wait a very long time, and it's just the 3. But I think that just goes to show how good then those first 2 are.
That's the reason why I started Indie Outlook. That's the reason why my wife started her site, Cinema Femme, which is devoted to providing a platform for female and non-binary filmmakers. And that's just her natural interest. But, you can't be covering the film beat for as long as I have without developing a passion for the filmmakers who don't get the chances that their white male heterosexual counterparts do, and it's happened again and again with me. Filmmakers who have a great film right off the bat. Clock Watchers won a couple awards. It was considered a really fantastic movie, great cast. And yet with 13 Conversations, she and Karen had written the script before Clock Watchers was released in 1997. And yet it took them, 3.5 years, almost 4 years to finally get that film going. And I can just imagine, even though this film had amazing reviews when it came out, it won a couple major awards from, I think, the San Diego Film Critics.
Yeah.
It took a decade for the third film, Thin Ice, to come out. Now, I'm not sure exactly what they're up to now. I think they work as, they offer services as writers for hire, and anyone would be lucky enough to have them on their team. But, it's just a shame, because I just feel like if a man had directed either of these, they would have been pretty
more
set.
More on it.
I think it's interesting. I mean, this is an independent sort of film during its time when it was released. I mean, this came out in 2002. 2001 if we want to talk, when it came out for the Venice Film Festival. That was its initial release, but it was released in the U.S. in May 24th of 2002. But it's always interesting to compare and contrast an indie film versus major blockbuster films for, say perhaps 2002. And this sort of predates what we've got now. Is everyone is always going bonkers, including myself, for all the films that are released under the moniker of A24, because those are the real, I could call it indie films, but I almost don't even think A24 is indie anymore. But A24, when they first were releasing movies, that was sort of an indie blockbuster name, and it was like, can you really put the two together, indie and blockbuster? But indie, it's just like, wow, anything that had A24 slapped next to it, I'm like, wow, this is really so awesome. And because it was something that wasn't just a Hollywood extravaganza, it was like, man, like, it's just something that's so different. Now, I guess I would say A24 isn't so much as an indie kind of thing, but they're still making movies that just aren't what you'd expect from everyone else. And I feel almost as if this film, 13 Conversations About One Thing, is that kind of feeling. You would go to a movie in 2002, it's always the same Hollywood staple, but this movie is something different. I think this movie is really just what A24 would have been, 20 years ago. My gosh. If A24 existed 20 years ago. But it's just that idea that people just love something different. And I think it really speaks for Roger Ebert's mind 20 years ago. It's like, you just like seeing different things in the movies rather than what Hollywood pumps out as the standard. Everyone goes and sees the same thing over and over again. I mean, that's what makes Marvel famous right now, to be completely honest. It's just they're putting out the same superhero films. Everyone goes and sees the same thing. And then when they see something different, most of the time I think people like seeing something different. And
I know that's like, a whole other thing.
We've got female superhero movies now, and everyone's putting them down. That's a different conversation.
I mean, you're absolutely right.
What's going on with that? But I digress.
For this, had they been around 20 years ago, because this is, I think, the 20th anniversary of its U.S. release. I think it premiered at festivals in 2001, but I think 2002 is when everyone was seeing it. And what defines kind of your standard run-of-the-mill studio movie? It's usually a lot of studio heads saying, we have to move the plot forward. If this isn't about the story moving forward in a kind of a more standard way, then just cut it. And I noticed when I was working for Hollywood Chicago, I would do a lot of Blu-ray reviews, and I would be very thorough. I'd watch all the deleted scenes, all of that. And so many times the deleted scenes were the most interesting parts of some of these blockbusters, where they cut out something that would have gotten you so much more involved and engaged in the story. It never took time to earn the investment because it was about just moving the plot. They didn't care about building the characters. And what I love, I love stories that are the vignette style. I loved writing vignettes. In high school, I learned when we were reading different, The House on Mango Street. That was a book we read. And I just noticed that you could have the full impact of an epic novel in just a small little, 10 minutes or so. And I think she does that so beautifully here. The movie 13 Conversations, it is like 13 little, vignettes, slices of life with the titles that it's kind of like a Woody Allen's Hannah and her sisters. It's like a sentence or kind of a claim or a thought or, some quote that will echo what we've just heard or will be, said eventually. And it's like film is philosophy. It's like all of these, little scenes could be taken separately as just food for thought and then put together. They're more than just, they're more meaningful than how they are separately. And there's moments in this film. Matthew McConaughey, I'm kind of hot and cold on him as an actor. Sometimes he rubs me the wrong way. Sometimes I like him. I think this is some of the best acting he's ever done in his career. And for the same reason why I love Tom Cruise in something like Born on the 4th of July or Magnolia. I love when you have this big macho, suave, just vain persona, and then you just break it all down. And there's a shot of him late in the film. I think it's the last scene he's in, and I won't give away. I guess you don't worry about spoilers, but I'll just say there's a moment where he has an epiphany at the end of this film, and Jill Sprecher, she has a wonderful audio commentary on her DVD. And she talks about how I think it was the studio or someone was they said, well, we should cut here. We should cut to something else. We don't have to keep the camera on McConaughey's face. And she was so wise in saying, no, you can't cut that moment because you are literally going through the process of this man who has given up almost everything, all of a sudden feeling like he has a new lease on life. And it's an amazing piece of acting that moves at its own rhythm. That's not worried about, the focus groups necessarily, or will we alienate people with, being a little too slow or cutting, or not cutting enough. And I mean, that's what's the beauty of independent cinema. There's a great monologue he gives in the bar towards the end. It's just on his face. Yeah.
I thought that was a great choice. And I thought they did that on a few people too. I think they did that on Alan Arkin as well when he was talking.
Yes.
And they don't do that in a lot of movies. I think they do that in, or they don't do that in a lot of movies. I mean, it's just in so many movies, it's just so fast paced. We're always cutting from one person to the next. And I think it's a great tool for dramatization. They should really teach that more in film school, where it's like, no, just keep the camera on this person, like keep the dialogue going, even if they're not talking. Just keep showing their face to really showcase their the scene. Or when you were speaking at the music box at the when we were talking about Lost Highway, and
I was interviewing Mary Sweeney, who is from Madison, Wisconsin, just like Jill Sprecher. She's a fellow amazing filmmaker from Madison.
It all connects. Yeah. You had mentioned the movie In Cold Blood.
Yes.
And this just makes me think of one of the final scenes as he's standing there giving his dialogue. Now, that's an example of him actually talking, and we're keeping the camera on his face.
Yes.
But it's one of those things where it's just like those moments of just never-ending camera that's just sticking there.
Yes.
You don't have to keep cutting the camera, everybody. You can keep it just sitting there as a static shot, and it will mean something. And I love more connections here. Conrad Hall's cinematography from that movie up until American Beauty, when he chained that into talking about a plastic bag flying around.
Yeah. And then Road to Perdition, he wins the posthumous Oscar for Road to Perdition. Like it's incredible. You mentioned that shot in Cold Blood. And I don't want to get too off topic, but that's one of the greatest shots in cinema, in my opinion. I saw In Cold Blood purely to research Robert Blake, and you get more, background on him before doing the Lost Highway Q&A. And the shot of him, he plays one of the killers that Truman Capote, in really the first true crime novel, got to meet and sort of, I mean, certainly not apologizing for what they did, but he definitely humanizes them. You see how damaged this guy is. And he's opening up, right before he's put to death, he opens up about his father. And it's a monologue that very much mirrors in some ways Robert Blake's relationship with his own father. And so what Conrad Hall does here is he lights it in such a way that the rain hitting the window next to his face is reflecting off of his face. And he's playing a man who is not open with his emotions. So the rain then externalizes the emotion that he's withholding from the camera. And so it looks like tears caressing his face. Just absolute genius. Absolute genius. Yeah.
So much film technicalities that I've just learned in the past 5 minutes and expressed in the past 5 minutes, all from this chain that came out of the little bits that we were talking about, 13 Conversations About One Thing.
Yes.
But I want to dive right back into that film, 13 Conversations About One Thing. This movie, as it started off, I was already so curious to see how this movie would kind of chain along, because it was exactly what I didn't think it was going to be. It was exactly not like an action movie. It wasn't anything fast-paced. It was going to be a stretch of I'm not going to say snail's pace. It's not like it was moving that slow, but it was certainly just kind of taking its time as it started off. And I was very curious to see that it started off with John Turturro's character, Walker, coming home with a black eye and talking to his wife. And I thought it was a very interesting way to start this movie. As he's coming home with a black eye, he sits down and it's a very casual conversation. And as I look back on this now, I'm thinking it's interesting that she's asking him what he's looking for in life. And he's telling her basically, I might even have the quote here, but he's saying, she's asking him what he really wants out of life, and I do have the quote here. He tells her what everyone wants, to wake up enthused, to experience life, and to be happy. And then he's asking his wife if she's stopped smoking yet, and of course she's lighting a cigarette.
Yeah,
so
it's very real.
Yes.
I think, I don't know, my expectations going into this movie, I didn't really know what to expect. I will put it out there, I'm not the biggest Matthew McConaughey fan.
Yeah, me neither.
I was kind of like not looking forward to it.
Yeah.
And then in his first scene, when he gets in a car accident, I thought it was a bird. And
yeah, it looks
how
like
dramatic
it.
it was.
Yes.
Yeah, and just how dramatic. And he's like bleeding. And I was like, are you kidding me? It's a bird.
Yeah.
And then you can ask Adam, like, when it showed then that he hit someone, I was like, oh shit.
Yeah, yes. And it's so brilliant how that's done, because it's made to be disoriented, because he's like, well, all of a sudden this flash and what happened, and it's just, he's lost in his day, and just, he won this case and all this, and it just comes to a crashing halt, literally. Right
yeah,
there.
and that's really the part of the movie where I was like hooked.
Yeah.
Like that's what got me to want to keep watching more.
Yes, and he knows, being a lawyer, like how much trouble he's in,
Right.
with this, no matter if it was an accident or not, and then that decision to leave the scene of the crime. He just knows it's over for him in some ways, by deliberately making that decision. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's his best performance that I've seen in terms of dramatically speaking. I'd take it over.
I'll take it over
Dallas
most
Paris
of his
Club
movies
any day myself, but yeah. He didn't have to
I gotta be
starve
honest,
himself
I
to
think,
show how brilliant he is,
I think most of the Matthew McConaughey roles after this movie, like, it just seems so, like, corny, or just very just like so expected of like the type of characters he plays, just kind of like, I don't know, like off the shoulder, kind of like, man, I'm Matthew McConaughey,
surfer
like,
dude.
hey.
That's literally a movie of the surfer, dude, and it's a shame, because when you become a big star, you do get pegged in a certain thing, and just seeing McConaughey in this, he's capable of more than that. Just like when you see Adam Sandler in Punch Drunk Love or Uncut Gems, there's more in him than Jack and Jill, but it's just, how many times do you get the opportunity? But he was, I guess, the big name to hook certain people into seeing it. But for my money, the big name was Alan Arkin, who he's talking to there, because he's just one of my very favorite actors, and he's wonderful in this film. And you don't know why he's such a grump. And I think some of the funniest scenes that he just confronts this cheerful staff member at his work. He's like, why are you smiling? Why are you smiling? Until you realize that he has this, this son that has this horrible drug addiction. He's going down this downward spiral. So then again, movies being an empathy generating machine, that's the genius of this film, is you peel back layer upon layer and you understand what makes each of these people tick. And then Clea Duvall, I should mention, as the woman who McConaughey hits, this cleaning woman, wonderful character actress, and very much based on Jill Sprecher. Jill Sprecher, there were these she lived in New York. She had these two horrible muggings. She had like brain surgery after one of them. And that character is very much reflective of her experience, being someone who just just was very optimistic. People are by nature good. And then these things just shake her out of her worldview. And then you get Amy Irving in one of my favorite final shots in any movie. Just, how the yin and the yang of how John Turturro as Amy Irving's husband, the thing he says sort of flippantly to someone and the catastrophic result that occurs from it. The inverse that we see with Amy Irving is what also happened to Jill Sprecher. She was assaulted on a train and, hit in the head. And I guess some person helped her and gave her a smile. And that just all of a sudden reinvigorated her belief in humanity. And that's the beauty of the Amy Irving character. I guess I'm kind of going in main circles, but I love how she can put these epiphanies of her life into all these different characters.
Mm-hmm. I think that's something we talked about last episode, actually, Adam, is this whenever directors or writers use so much of their own experiences, I think it makes the movie so much better because it's real. It feels real. It feels like something you yourself could be experiencing. And that's what I want when I'm watching a movie.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. And,
I think, too, what's interesting, Alan Arkin's character, and maybe this is just me not remembering correctly, but in the beginning, it seemed like when he was telling the story of the happy coworker, it was like one person and he created an ending where he came back unhappy. And then when we actually see the scenes play out, it seems very different. That, he does have a happy ending and it's two different people. And from my last job where I was doing something where I was reviewing and looking at interviews of people, it's so interesting to see how people remember things and how different that can be from how it's actually happened.
Yes.
And I think we see that a lot with Alan Arkin's character is that, and maybe he remembers it correctly, but the way he's telling it to Matthew McConaughey's character is just, he's like tweaking it to be what he wants it to be versus how it actually happened.
Well, yeah, and also, I think, you see sort of the happy beginning of that person's life, and you don't really see the aftermath. He's sort of detailing the McConaughey, but regardless, his perspective is colored entirely by his own life experience, and that's the beauty of this film. Is if someone's more bitter, if someone's more optimistic, it just comes from one's own life experience, and that's what happens so many times. I'm not religious now, but growing up, junior high school. In the church, you'd have that, God, this is all in God's hands and he has a plan for everyone. And it's so much, I won't say it's easy to accept that, but it's much more palatable, I suppose, to accept if you haven't had a catastrophic thing happen to you. You tell someone with a terminal illness, it's in God's hands. It's harder to accept that. And I think that's the beauty of what Jill does. I think she has empathy for everyone's sort of, place in life in that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things that I find really interesting when we were talking earlier about how maybe the movie's not as well known because she's a woman, very contemporary, I think it came out only a few years earlier, is Magnolia.
Yes.
By Paul Thomas Anderson. And I feel like it's similar in that we have these, like vignettes and disparate stories of people who they're all interconnected. And so to me, this movie was very reminiscent of Magnolia. And I think that's a good comparison of, PTA is obviously like a well-known male director. And then we have Sprecher, who is not, and kind of seeing like how well Magnolia did versus this one.
Yes. Yeah. And both having a major star like McConaughey or Tom Cruise playing, someone who's very sure of himself and then gets, taught the hard way.
Right. And you would mention you're like Tom Cruise. You liked his performance in Magnolia.
Did you mention Magnolia when I was off?
Magnolia, Born on the 4th of July. Those are my favorite performances of his. And he's a great actor when he's not trying to be evil Knievel. That's just
right.
Sorry, I missed the Magnolia bit.
No,
he was just saying like Tom Cruise's performance in Magnolia is great, and now we've got Tom Cruise doing fucking
nostalgia bait 2022 or whatever. Yeah. I won't crap on Top Gun. It's a wonderful roller coaster ride, but I wish you would just get back to acting. I'm much more interested in that than seeing
The Mummy was not good.
That's
either.
crazy stunt is. Yeah, I'm not a big Top Gun person myself, so I know. But but no, I mean, Magnolia was an important film to me growing up. That was the first film that made me realize you could break rules. You could tell stories your own way. I saw it at an impressionable age. I was like freshman in high school. And then I went back and saw that he's taking a cue from Robert Altman, going back to Shortcuts and Nashville, these films that have interconnected stories going on. And then this massive thing happens, this catastrophe, whether it's an earthquake or an assassination or frogs raining from the sky, and it shakes everyone out of their roles and they have to reevaluate their lives. And I feel like what Sprecher does so beautifully here is that it's a different thing for each person in a way. There's things that shake people out of their perspective, and I love how she's playing with that. You can say yes, there's similarities for sure. She's operating in that level, but it's very much her own vision and her own voice.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, if we're going back to Robert Altman, if you give us a week, then you can come back and we'll talk about Popeye.
Oh yes, I have a lot to say about Popeye. That was the first Altman film I saw, of course, as a kid. So yeah. Big fan.
We were going to review that, but we did When Harry Met Sally instead.
Oh, sure. Oh, another classic. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I'll say this, if we have just another minute, I'll just say this real quick. Roger Ebert's review of this movie is my favorite review written by Roger Ebert. Favorite positive
review. It's a good review.
My favorite negative review is Mr. Magoo, but we don't have to get into that. but 13 Conversations, the last line of his review is, if the universe is indifferent, what a consolation that we are not. And to me, that line's everything. That line is, why am I a film critic? Why do I write? It's about engaging with the work. It's about engaging in life. If you engaging in a film in a way is like engaging in your day-to-day existence. It's just trying to live in a more, wide awake state. That's sort of how I see it.
Mm-hmm.
He very much mentioned himself quite a bit in his review about this movie. I mean, he was talking about how he had his own incident of he was talking with someone or something was going on, and then he slipped on like a floor or something and hurt himself and broke his shoulder bones. And it was something along the lines of how we can choose our own actions, but we can't choose our own resolutions, our own outcomes. Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean, most critics like this movie. Robert Ebert obviously gave it a fantastic review.
Yeah.
But even so, Rotten Tomatoes, one of our favorite sites, with Roger Ebert, it has 83% from critics and even a 71% from audience. And I think that's surprising to me, just because I'd never heard of this movie. That doesn't mean anything. I'm not well versed, but generally, I feel like when movies of this type that are a bit more abstract, audiences generally vote lower. They don't like it as much as critics. And so it was surprising to me that they're both quite equal.
Yes, absolutely. I think that this and Clock Watchers you put in front of any audience today, and generally, I believe they'll very much enjoy it.
I do have a question I can throw out there. Who, if you were to be asked who is the central character of the movie, who would you say?
Very good question. Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, I feel in a way like humanity is the central character without being too pretentious, but in a way it's they're all faces of similar 13 Conversation about one thing. They're all petals on the magnolia flower. It's there's definitely a synchronicity.
Oh, here you go back to Magnolia, right?
There is, but
just
it's
get
true.
Tom
I mean, they
Cruise
are
always coming back.
bedfellows. Yes, but
I mainly asked because when reading various reviews, it was really interesting because each one would kind of point to a different character as who they thought the story really was centrals around. So many of them talked about Walker, so John Turturro's character, as being kind of the main. And I think that's because his timeline is the most linear.
Sure.
And it's through him that a lot of it was able to piece together. But others were saying how Beatrice is kind of who they focused on, while others would say Troy. And so, I just found that really interesting. I think I felt Beatrice was, and I don't know if that's because I'm a woman, so it's just who I relate to. But I can see kind of every argument, because I would also go with Gene, which is Alan Arkin's character. I would say he was probably my next main focal point.
There's a great argument to be made for each of those, and I'm sure it's just my general inclination to I'm just so engaged with Alan Arkin. He's just one of the best actors there is, and his character has such a fascinating arc in this film, where he starts out so bitter and just so, hating life. And he does the very thing that he thinks will make him happier. And he ends up feeling like he has to compensate for it.
Mm-hmm.
He starts to feel remorse. And there's such beauty in the arc of that character. But again, all the others, Beatrice, I mean, what an incredible arc there, going from night and day, and her friend Dory, who apparently is somewhat based off of Jill's own sister Karen. She being the more cynical one, she values Beatrice being so optimistic. So when she can't be that anymore, it's just devastating. It's like I can't have that same dynamic. So I love that everyone is sort of gravitating towards different things. I just think with Alan Arkin that, and really the bookender is Patricia, Walker, the John Turturro character, Patricia, Amy Irving's character. She's the bookend because we really kind of start the film with her and we end the film with her. And in both cases, and Jill mentions this in her audio commentary, she's always looking out a window. She's always looking for something. And all these characters in a way are kind of looking for something. It can be argued in those last moments she's kind of found it. And it was funny. I showed it to my wife. She hadn't seen the film. And she just was like, oh, well, Amy Irving and Alan Arkin, they're probably going to get together at the end of this movie, right? I'm like, well, not really. It's going to be a lot more, just watch. She's like, oh, actually, that was really, it's a perfectly modulated moment. There's so many scenes in films where you just feel like they just turned the screw a bit too tightly or it was too tidy. And I just think this is just perfection in terms of where she chooses to end the film.
As we were talking about PTA already, as you're just talking about that, in Licorice Pizza, I think he turned the screw too far. In the ending, when she's like, I love you, Gary. I hated it.
Get rid of the line. Just have them run off and don't say anything.
Just left with them running off and end from there, fade to black. So instantly that came to my mind when you were just talking about that.
Sure. I mean, and Licorice Pizza, I had a ton of fun with, a lot of great things to say about it. But yeah, I mean, there were moments, and my wife couldn't stand it in terms of just the central relationship creeped her out. But to me, it's not a love story. That's the thing I like about it, at least for the majority of it. It's two people whose lives, for whatever reason, complement one another during this stretch of time, and they have this sort of need for one another in that moment. But it wasn't a love story, I feel, despite that last line. I don't know. Feels like something a studio exec just plastered
on. If anything, it was a love story to like Northern California.
Maybe. Yeah, exactly. Yes, definite love letter to Northern California. No question about it.
See, if I had to pick someone as like the focal point in this movie, I would agree with what you were first saying about like how Gene was kind of like a main point through a lot of this. And I say that just because he kind of started by planting the seed of how everyone was trying to find happiness as kind of like the beginning of the movie. He's explaining to Matthew McConaughey's character, Troy, how Troy's super happy about what just happened with him as an attorney, how, he got this guy locked up and he's going to buy drinks for his entire table. And, Alan Arkin's character, Gene, he needs to cheer up and not be so pessimistic. But Gene's saying, how everything is in life isn't the greatest thing ever. And he's super sad at the table. But he's explaining how something just happened at his job and how a guy won the lottery and he just quit his job right in front of him. And he explains that whole scenario to Matthew McConaughey. And as the movie progresses on, then we start to see all these other things. But Gene is like the ending point of the movie as well, where we see him, as you were saying, looking at Patricia, Amy Irving's character, and we see this kind of resolution between the two of them. I just think that Gene is kind of like the point A and the point B of like what we see as like the beginning of the moral kind of point of this film and the end of this like moral compass of the movie as well.
Yeah, I mean, I love what Jill and Karen are saying here about just the smallest gesture we can give, just daily interactions with people can have just a tremendous ripple effect. Yeah. You can go into Run Lola Run for the more action-oriented form of this type of philosophy. But I think it's so moving to me, Alan saying, I just felt that if I had given some gesture to my wife, I could have saved my whole marriage at a very pivotal moment when they were together. And it's so poetic how she does it. To me, it's not hitting the nail on the head. She'll plant a seed of something that'll pay off 3 scenes later or the whole movie later. And that runs throughout the whole film is like poetry in that way.
Mm-hmm. That's something I wanted to mention too, because there is a lot of clues that she'll give, like the doll head, Beatrice's doll.
Yes.
Head.
Oh,
how it has the one eye closed, and then later we see it open. It's like her eyes have been opened, and now has a different view on life.
I feel like she's trying to fix it too. It's kind of like she's like playing with the eye.
Yeah.
Yes.
But even Walker, when he's teaching his class, is talking about the gravity of like someone falling, right? And then that's exactly what happens to Rob McElhenney, his character, later in the movie. So we do have these like glimpses of things to come.
Yes, it's the other side of the coin of, just saying something to someone that's just so, hateful, nihilistic. It just comes off as flippant, but you have no idea what's going on. How that impacts someone. You don't know how it's going to impact them.
Yeah.
I think about that sometimes, even in my reviews. I mean, I look back at some of the reviews I did for Hollywood Chicago, and I'm like, I didn't have to be that nasty. It's like, sometimes you can get so in love with your own voice as a writer that, you don't want to be mean in a way that's unnecessary. And I feel that what was so great about Roger Ebert is that if he was ever not liking a movie, it was more from the love of the art form where the frustration was coming from. And sometimes I can see reviews I wrote a decade ago, and I'm like, I think most of it is from my frustration in the art form, but sometimes I can sense just my own frustration as well coming through. But I think it's good for writers to sort of reassess their work over time. And I think you never stop learning, you never stop growing as a person. And that's the great thing about this film. It's like many different epiphanies happening at many different times in these characters' lives,
Yeah. And I think if I had watched this movie when it came out, I would have liked it. As you're saying, like you do grow as a person, you learn to understand things better.
Yeah.
And I think watching this now in my 30s was like the perfect time.
Yeah.
Versus watching it when I was 11, I wouldn't have understood. So
yes. Well, I mean, my grandma, her name is Marion Thompson. She is co-founder of the breastfeeding organization, La Leche League, that was started by her and a bunch of other housewives in the 50s. And it went all over the world. And she became friends with Grace Kelly. And she just has an amazing life. Someone should just make a movie about her. But I would love hanging with her. She was kind of like my friend as well as my grandma. And there'd be times I'd stay with her for a weekend and we would just rent the most interesting films. And this was one of them. She's like, you just got to sit down. And actually, Magnolia was another. She's like, you really got to, give that film a shot. It was films that would freak out my parents, but she'd be like, no, actually you should watch American Beauty, or, just like Moulin Rouge, or, films I usually wouldn't even attempt to watch. And I loved films that were, and also my dad's a social worker. It was a social worker at elementary school for 35 years. I love human psychology. And I think art is the perfect way of exploring psychology and philosophy.
Definitely.
And that's what Jill does so well. Jill and Karen,
Yeah. No, I completely agree.
It's interesting that Alan Arkin's character Gene is so pessimistic in his career, in his life, and that he works with a man named Smiley as well. I can't get over that there's a guy that's working with him that they just call Smiley. I mean, so his name's
he's so unhappy.
So his name's not literally Smiley, okay? Let's be real here. But everyone calls him Smiley, and I can't get over the fact that he's just going to be Gene is going to be just a never-ending pessimist because there's a guy there that everybody loves named Smiley, and it's like, you're going to just keep coming to work and be like, I'm pissed off because this guy's called Smiley and everybody loves him, and it's like, well, maybe you just need to be a little more happy then.
Well, that's the point, Adam. He is jealous, right? Yeah. Because he is having struggles in his life.
And if he was happy, then we wouldn't have a movie. But you know what?
You just want everyone to be happy.
I mean, the one missing element here, and I don't think it's a flaw. I think to me, it's a flawless movie. But Smiley, what it would have been interesting is going into his life, because I've always suspected the people who can maintain that sort of cheerfulness, and not in like a false way or he's never being mean about his cheerfulness to me. I feel like he's always just starting small talk, making people laugh. I think he's very generous with his persona. It's a very well acted part in the film. I feel like a lot of that is hard won for people. I feel like so many of the people I know as the happiest on a daily basis, they've been through a lot of stuff in their life to get to that point. And we don't really ever see him in a private moment. And I feel like there's a whole lot more under that veneer, that persona he puts on every day. That's not for us to judge,
Yeah.
Their next movie can be a spinoff.
I would love that. I'd love to see them do another thing.
I mean, they're doing a spinoff of the valets from Ferris Bueller.
Oh, yeah.
So, are they really?
Yeah. So they can do a spinoff of Smiley.
Oh, you're right. They're doing a spinoff of everything.
And I mean, the closest you get to that with Smiley is him sitting at the bar and him just noticing Gene and being like, Gene, hey, what's going on? And it's like, oh, how you doing, Smiley? And he's like, oh, things are okay. And it's like, dude, you just got laid off. You have job. You have no money. And he's like, yeah, it's all right, but, I'll make it. And he's still happy. And Gene's just thinking, like, how the hell is this guy still happy? Like, I laid him off. He's got no money, and he's still buying drinks in a bar. He's still sitting there with a smile on his face. And at that point, that's when you get the twist in the movie where Gene's like, okay, you know what? I'm going to recommend him for employment at this other place where I know I can get him a good job. Yeah. And again, as a viewer, you're thinking, what is the psyche behind this man, or anyone for that matter? Like, what are these people thinking? Especially Gene. Why is he going to go get him another job? He just laid him off. Like, why is he going to go recommend him for another job? Because obviously he can't take him back into his own place of work. So it's like, all right, I'll get him employed somewhere else and just move on like nothing happened.
Guilt.
Yeah, I mean, I think he just feels that remorse. This did not satisfy him, because it would have satisfied him. I feel initially if he just broke down, but you get a sense this is how this guy deals with every hardship in his life. It's a struggle. It's not easy to be a happy person. It's a struggle to find a way to look for the good in things sometimes.
And it's interesting to see that among all the characters in this movie. And I think that's really, as you were saying, like, the movie's flawless. It's interesting just to see the moral psyche of humans because it just looks so real. And it's just like his way of dealing with guilt, and then also like Matthew McConaughey's character Troy's way of dealing with guilt is just like he thinks he killed someone, and it's not until his friend sees him in like it's like a psych ward, isn't it? Like he's just kind of sitting there thinking he's lost himself, and he tries cutting himself too, and it's like no,
that's such an amazing detail, and it's the hardest shot to watch as he gets a cut on his forehead from hitting her, and he's going to keep that wound open as long as he can until he gets blood poisoning. It's just awful,
And that's his way of coping. Like he feels like he has to pay for this in some way.
It's like self-flagellating. Just
exactly.
Yeah.
And I guess as I opened up and I was saying, like, is this movie really about happiness? I think maybe I'll retract my statement. And like, even though there is a lot about remorse and guilt and all these other feelings, in the end, that relates to your happiness. So, Gene's not happy because he's remorseful about what he did. So is Troy and Beatrice. So I guess I'll take back my feelings.
No, and I don't think there's even a sense, there's not even a need to retract necessarily, because I mean, happiness is an element, but it's also it's a deeper thing than just being happy. It's what makes life worth living. What makes it, is it worth it to even go on another day? And that's what Beatrice loses all sense of that, and it's so powerful. Totally taken from Jill's life, where Beatrice is going to commit suicide, and then she just locks eyes with someone, and it's just enough of that silent interaction that actually. Maybe I can go another day, and who even knows how we affect one another in that way. And that's, to me, that's sort of the hopeful aspect of the film, I guess.
It's just so crazy to see the realism in this movie, and these are the kind of movies that I do enjoy watching. I mean, yes, I like watching, Monsters Inc. and
Oh, and that's a brilliant film in its own way. I mean,
the
Pixar
classic,
has so much meaning. Actually, it's funny you said Monsters Inc. Maybe that was just a random thing that crossed your mind, but the last shot of Monsters Inc. it is in a way as brilliant as the last shot of this film, because it doesn't turn the screw too tightly. It's all we needed to see was that character's reaction when he sees something that he wants to see fade to black. That's it. We don't need to see the big hug and the reunion. And it's like, sometimes that's so much more effective, because then we're filling in, that blank space in our head and kind of owning it more for ourselves. And that's what Lynch does. It's all about filling in the blank space,
Oh, very much so.
Absolutely.
Yes. Where almost sometimes you're like, is there even anything on the canvas?
Yeah, you're like, what? What am I even working
I love
with?
that myself.
No, we're big Lynch fans in this household as well.
Yeah. Even though seeing you at the Music Box talking about Lost Highway, that was the first time we saw Lost Highway recently.
Yeah.
So that was our first experience, but that was a wonderful experience, I will say. And Lost Highway, that definitely put me for a trip. But
and I did not get that movie the first time I saw it. Like, Mulholland Drive is my personal favorite film. It's that, and It's a Wonderful Life, and The Shining. Those are my 3 favorite movies.
Good.
But Lost Highway, it didn't make any sense to me the first time. So I totally understand Roger's reaction, but there's certain films that just grow on you the more they kind of ruminate in your mind. And there's just tremendous layers to that film. I've really grown to appreciate over the years.
Funny story. Adam and I actually took my dad to that screening of Lost Highway.
Oh, no.
My dad is not a film guy. He doesn't really watch movies at all. And so I just remember looking over at him once the credits started rolling, and he was like, what the hell was that? He's like, why did you force me to sit through this?
Yes. I remember my mom's reaction, because again, Magnolia was like a life-changing film for me. And I was like, and my parents, I would always force them to watch whatever movie I thought was like the most amazing thing I've ever seen. I show them Magnolia, and at the end of the film, I'll just never forget how she put it. Because again, 9/11 was so fresh in our minds. That was like 2001 or something.
Yeah.
My mom said, I feel like the Twin Towers fell on me and I was given a toothpick to get myself out of the rubble.
Oh.
Like, whoa. That was just, I've never experienced that before, but there's some films that just people are not prepared for. They're, like Magnolia deals with tremendously heavy topics. It's not going to be everyone's cup of tea. For me, it was. For me, I didn't matter how despairing so much of the film was. It was just so exhilarating to watch on a storytelling level and a craft level. And it is still my favorite PTA film. And then I show her There'll Be Blood years later. She's like, that's the best film I've ever seen. I'm like, wow, okay. I don't know what your cup of tea is. But, 13 Conversations, I think some critics said it was too depressing or it was too... they derided it, but I don't know. To me, it's a film that's thinking this deeply about its characters and bringing up such insightful issues. I don't know. I never felt this was just a pessimistic for the sake of being pessimistic film. It's a lot deeper and more complex than that. I think it's a hopeful film to me. But
the way that it ends, I think, yes, obviously it talks about heavy topics and it's a bit sad at points, but at the end we see that smile and we see that hope for a better future.
Yeah.
And so I would agree with that statement completely, because as you said, some reviewers were like, it's just too sad. Like, the despair of this movie just drags the whole thing down. And I didn't feel that way. I think it ends in an uptick.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And not in a way that hits it too much on the head. I'm glad there's not another scene where 5 years later, how are they all doing? I like that it leaves us thinking about what happens next.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think with all of this being said, I think that brings us to a good point to mention our slurps up or slurps down on this movie. And I think all of us have kind of already put in our beverages, full blast. But Laura, do you give this movie a slurps up or slurps down?
Yeah, definitely a slurps up. I think when I initially watched it, when it ended, I was like, But I think now that I've sat on it and thought about it and listened to us talking about it, I get it. I'm like, yeah, let's watch this movie. I agree. I don't think non-white men get enough, a press or viewership as they should. So anytime there's someone that doesn't fit that, that's making movies, I'm always like, let's do it. Let's watch it. So regardless of that, it's a beautiful film. It's written beautifully. The way that they interweave the scenes and mess with the timeline, it really makes you think and try and piece things together. So I would definitely say slurps up.
I think for me, I would give this movie a slurps up. Certainly after everything that we've talked about today. And I mean, when I first started watching this, as I had mentioned earlier, I think it started off moving a little bit slow, and definitely from the scene that you had mentioned earlier, Laura, when I believe it was make sure I get my characters correct here, Beatrice's character who gets hit by the car. And when we see those lines connect of first, when you said it looked like a bird that got hit by the car, but then we realized it was Beatrice, and we see that was what happened. I really got sucked into this movie as well, and everything just really started coming together for me with all of the different characters, all of the different meanings of everyone trying to find happiness, and then seeing the other sides of the coin of, you know, what is happiness, ? That's what I'm going to say. My gosh, it was such an interesting film overall. And now I definitely want to watch the other films that the Sprecher sisters have put together, because I haven't seen either one of them. So I'm really curious to see it, and I definitely give this movie a slurps up. And now, without further ado, Matt, please.
I think we know the answer.
Please tell us.
Slurps down, definitely slurps down. No, this has been a favorite film of mine over the years. It's a film I love introducing people to, and you know, as Laura says, sometimes it's a slow burn. Sometimes you have to let the film ruminate a bit, but I love how it's a film that just makes you want to talk about it afterwards. I love a film. I think that's what Roger said in his review. It's like a water cooler movie. You can't stop, you know, wanting to pick it apart and see how it affects people. And I'll just say also on a craft level really quick, the cinematographer on this film was Dick Pope, who's done some of the best Mike Leigh films like Vera Drake. It's one of my favorite movies. So she's working with a great DP. The editor is Stephen Mirione, who is fresh off his Oscar for Traffic, Soderbergh's Traffic. So she's working with some of the best people in the business, but it's ultimately her vision that drives the day. And if I could just get anyone to see just the perfect yin yang of like a workplace sort of, you know, comedy drama, like the Happy Face, Sad Face, Clock Watchers, and 13 Conversations are just fantastic. And I'll add one other thing real quick. Another film I love that's in the vignette style of storytelling is a film called 9 Lives, and it's by Rodrigo Garcia. And it's basically 9 short films, each shot in one continuous take. So it's just 9 shots. Each is its own kind of short film, and each revolves around a woman at a pivotal moment in her life, a pivotal moment where her life could go one way or the other, and we're just following her as she's making this decision. And they're kind of lightly connected, but not really. And I love that. I love that it's more thematically connected than we have to connect all the dots. And it's Robin Wright. It's my favorite performance from Robin Wright. Her performance is amazing. They also have Glenn Close and Amanda Seyfried and Sissy Spacek. Definitely worth checking that out too.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for suggesting this movie, because I don't think Adam and I would have ever watched it otherwise.
Right.
I gave him like 20 suggestions, but I just happened to show this to Rebecca, my wife, for the first time, and I was like, just on my mind. So if you want to do it, you know.
No,
I even said Top Gun Maverick. If you want to do Top Gun Maverick, I said that. So, yeah.
We picked it because it was the one that we didn't know.
Exactly.
Like, I'd never heard of it, which was surprising because it's Alan Arkin and Matthew McConaughey. So that was really the reasoning why we did, and I'm glad we watched it.
Oh, I'm so glad. So it just does my heart happy to introduce people to films that I just adore.
Yeah, Matt, thank you very much. Where can people find you online, on social media, anything like that?
Yes, RogerEbert.com. You can find my reviews and interviews there. I just interviewed Sterling K. Brown and Regina Hall for their movie Honk for Jesus, Save Your Souls, which is very interesting. Definitely Altman-esque in some ways. You can find me at Matt Fagerholm or at Indie Outlook on Twitter. Matt Fagerholm, my handle on Instagram, Indie Outlook. Indie-outlook.com is my blog. It's a decades worth, long archive of interviews with great filmmakers. And that's where you can find me. So
awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. And that wraps it up for this episode of Screen Slurps. Be sure to follow us on social media at Screen Slurps on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. And be sure to listen to us on Spotify, Ghana, or any other podcast streaming service out there. And if you enjoy what you hear, slide on over to Apple Podcasts and give us a 5-star rating. It will help us a lot. And if there's any crazy movies that you want to hear about, let us know. Leave a comment on one of our social media pages, and trust me when I say we will be sure to talk about it. So, closing out, I'm Adam Meisner.
And I'm Laura Herlacher.
And with us today,
Matt Fagerholm.
Yes.
Love to come again.
And we always love to have you. Slurps up, and we will catch you later.